Hi, welcome to this presentation by Aidan, Oliver and Matt. We will discuss in this presentation how we can make every physical education lesson inclusive to all students, including those with a certain aspect of physical disability. In particular, we will focus on those restricted to a wheelchair. No matter what their ability, movement and knowledge of sport, they need to be able to take part. This brings about an inclusive environment for all. In this presentation, we are going to discuss what the main problems are that wheelchair users face, the reasons for this, and what impact this has on a child and their learning. We are then going to discuss how we can overcome this and some recommendations from us as to how this can be implemented into a school and in particular a PE lesson.
So, what are the main reasons behind disabled children becoming excluded from mainstream lessons? Accessibility for a disabled student plays a huge part because one must be able to access a sports hall, the changing facilities, in order to be able to think about participating in a PE lesson. Then comes the question of has the teacher planned and prepared the lesson to make it adaptable for the child to participate with the rest of the class. This means ensuring adaptable equipment and rules and regulations to take place for the game to go ahead. A study by Eggleston and Charles et al. In 2009 looked at the factors that hindered disabled students in their participation of physical education. Their findings revealed that many aspects of participation lies in the dependent variables of a child and how much they can actually participate in. Also it revealed that they should use occupational therapists to try and focus on understanding extensively the child needs in order to include them in a PE setting. This study also revealed that the vast majority of teachers reported difficulty in varying from standard approaches and the national curriculum, and also that the average teacher feels unprepared to serve a purpose for a disabled student. A study by Goodwin and Watkinson in 2000 looked at the inclusiveness of physical education for disabled students in the US, and the study was on the perspective of students with disabilities. Their main findings and recommendations for teachers were for them to compel and embrace all students from all different diverse backgrounds and value them as positive attributes in lessons, no matter what their contribution. This study then looked at the effects this had from the student's perspective. In this study, they got the students to value the days they had PE as good and bad days, and this categorised how they felt during the lessons. See Figure 1. A good day for them was a sense of belonging. They felt they shared benefits with other students and they had a skillful and they participated in a skillful way. A bad day was when their competence was questioned, they were socially isolated and they were restricted in their participation. A few select students who viewed their days as bad days were asked to share why they thought it was a bad day. One student shared with the researchers that the teacher had told them they were doing dancing, but it was on the stage. And unfortunately, the student wasn't able to access the stage as they were in a wheelchair. The student described this feeling as horrible. They felt they had a sense of loneliness and obviously they were restricted in participation. This is just one simple way of how without the correct planning from a teacher, a student can so easily be excluded. On the flip side to this, when a child was included, they enjoyed being part of the mainstream class. They felt a sense of happiness as they were surrounded by other children who were better than them but they felt they could look up to and aspire to be like. This also supports the previous research from the previous slide by Elgerson and Charles et al. How such little hindrances can have a massive effect on a child's feeling. When they don't, the positives are incredible, as will be seen later in a presentation from the Boccia video. The impacts this has on a child's learning is huge. When they turn up to a lesson, for example, and the teacher hasn't taken any consideration into where the lesson is taking place, for instance, the lesson could be on a school field. How is a disabled student who is restricted to a wheelchair supposed to get on there? Well, they can't, so already they have been excluded just on a simple fact that the teacher hasn't thought 100% of the class and only about the vast majority who are the able-bodied. A child who has been affected by this is likely to feel a reduction in confidence, not feel motivated about PE anymore, and is going to feel a sense of frustration because they cannot do something which potentially they really enjoy.
Research suggests from Murata and Jansma in 1997 that support in the form of trained teaching assistants along with trained peer tutors can not only aid students with disabilities, prevent the inclusion of students with disabilities from disrupting the learning of peers without disabilities. Yet most of the current teaching assistants do not have the physical education training or experience needed to accommodate students with disabilities without support from the PE teacher or another specialist. In a study that examined the effects of teaching assistants in PE, Murata and Jansma found that a combination of trained teaching assistants with trained peer tutors improved participation of 3 students with multiple disabilities. Considering the unique needs of students with disabilities, one may question whether it is fair to these students to receive most of their education from either trained or untrained paraprofessionals, while students without disabilities are mostly taught by certified professionals. Another study from a different perspective by Moran and Abbott in 2002 was about the pivotal role that teaching assistants play in a school setting. Their main hypothesis, which is achieved in their results, is that teaching assistants do not have the required broad range of intellectual values, the physical ability, and the ability to promote inclusion out of a school environment, and this has been an issue they have found over the last 30 years. In this journal they found many positives for teaching assistants but also many negatives, which seems to be of the detrimental effect as to why disabled children are excluded. A positive example of teaching assistants they found was that they can act as an extra pair of eyes in the classroom, so the teacher would effectively have more control over the group. However, they also found that when teaching assistants were assigned to a child, it would be disempowering and anti-inclusion. This is because they would be talking to the child throughout the lesson, trying to act as a second teacher. From this, straight away, the child is excluded as they aren't listening to their teacher with their full undivided attention. In their discussion, this is also apparent because it states that teaching assistants sometimes almost do the work for them. Therefore, this removes the challenge for the child and they are not working to fulfill their potential or being challenged to seek improvements. This study and other ones we have reviewed tell us that schools need to be more selective in the teaching assistants they employ. They also need to ensure that they are fully trained in all aspects of disability and learning difficulties. Also, more planning from teachers to teaching assistants should be in place. Teaching assistants shouldn't just act as a pupil's brain, they should act to guide their learning a little more than the teacher has already done, to challenge their learning, or they could be used as a scribe for the student, or also help them to understand what the teacher has said. Defined by Block 2007, the use of an APE specialist is someone who has specific training in APE beyond the undergraduate level and who has been assigned by the district to provide APE services to students with disabilities. Vogler et al. In 2000 conducted an 18-week case study in an attempt to evaluate the effectiveness of an inclusive physical education class in which an APE specialist provides a direct one-on-one instruction to a student with a disability. In addition, the student with a disability and 3 randomly selected peers without a disability had high rates of on-task behaviours, 53% and 48% respectively, as well as high percentages of motor appropriate engagement, 41% and 47% respectively. This indicated that the student with a severe physical disability was successfully included and progressed towards their individual education programme objectives. Again, this was a case study with only 1 young student, and the student received a great deal of support compared to what is typically available in most schools. Results of Block and Zaman in 1996 and Vogler et al. In 2000 do show that inclusion can be successful for both students with and without severe disabilities when the student with a disability is supported by a trained personnel, including a trained APE specialist.
So, how do we overcome this? We're now going to talk about how we can adapt the instructions for wheelchair users, adapt the layout space and ensure there is accessibility. We're also going to talk about how we can adapt the equipment and also how we can adapt the games.
Adapting instructions. Some of the instructions given within the daily curriculum can be perceived to leave some pupils out, especially wheelchair users, such as, can we jog it into the red line now? As, this immediately singles out the wheelchair users, and these types of instructions should be blocked out as soon as possible, and there are ways around it. Simply wording the sentence better can indicate better inclusion with that session. For example, can we all come into the red line please? This instruction demonstrates that all are included and there isn't a specific way on how to come and line up on the red line, but everyone is still able to comply. Grouping. The wheelchair users should not be grouped together, as this can cause a ripple effect both for the wheelchair users and the pupils within the class. Dividing the pupils creates a divide in the class. It singles out different pupils of the class, which this should not happen no matter what the case or environment. Motivation. There are several factors which can affect the motivation of the child in the use of a wheelchair. First of all, parents. Are their parents allowing the children to be fully involved? They should be motivating by speaking to the teachers, making sure that a child is fully involved and engaged. Teachers. Are the teachers inclusive and motivating within a physical education setting? They should be motivating each child, no matter what their ability, giving such motivation instructions as, "Well done everyone," but also singling out different students, allowing for all to feel and be included with the use of motivation. And finally, peers. Are the peers friendly and inclusive? This is one of the difficult matters and is more dependent on the pupils within the class, as certain pupils can be judgmental just from the way they look. As Davies in 2002 stated, it is important to get your students without disabilities to see the person using the wheelchair and not the wheelchair itself. Therefore, it enables the students to identify that the wheelchair user is still able to move just as freely as them. Layout space. The layout space must be adequate in order for the lesson to be attainable for all. For example, if the lesson were to take place in a small area, then the lesson will be difficult to achieve, as not all participants will be able to move and work in the allocated area. Accessibility. All of the areas in which activities within a physical education setting take place must be accessible in order for everyone to be included. Therefore, there should be wheelchair ramps so wheelchair users are able to access each of the intended areas where the lesson will take place. Adapting equipment. Size. Can all members within that lesson be able to work with the size of the equipment in order to make it a fair task for all? It is vital that each member of that lesson can get involved no matter what the size of the equipment. For example, a wheelchair user may struggle to keep up with the pace of the game and if the ball is only small and hard to get hold of. A study by Morley et al. In 2005 looked at the teachers' conceptions of inclusive physical education and talked about all the barriers and restrictions that teachers face in order to include disabled students. Their main findings were that PE is a sport which has seen the least attention towards inclusion. One of the reasons was because it takes place in a distinctive environment. One of their main and most influential recommendations, we thought, was the level of practical training a teacher receives. They need to be more upskilled so that teachers can feel confident and actually know how to adapt the equipment and games in order to include those in wheelchairs and with a physical disability. Shape. Can the shape of the equipment used manipulate a game in order to make it more successful for all? For example, if the pupils are struggling to keep up with the speed of a round ball, they may change it into a ball which is slightly heavier and therefore will move slower. Weight. Is the weight of the equipment too heavy or too light for the lesson ahead? This can be altered in order to make the session more attainable for all. For example, if some of the pupils are struggling to keep the ball up, then this can be changed by making the ball into a sponge ball, even or a balloon. This allows for each member of the session to be able to achieve the intended outcome, therefore including all.
Rules. The rules of the game need to be adapted, especially for the wheelchair user, in order for them to be included. This can be achieved in several ways, but first needs the support from both the teachers and pupils for this to be accomplished. First of all, it will be important to ask the wheelchair user if they would like to be involved and in what way. This allows for indication of how comfortable they will feel in various game situations. If they want to be fully included, it is then up to the teacher to decide and to have already planned for this.
Number of players. The number of players on each team should be the same within a normal lesson. For example, the team with a disabled student should not be compensated by having more additional members. This will allow everyone to feel included and equal, and no one will be left out. Methods of scoring. There can be various methods of scoring systems which can manipulate a game, which can allow every member of the team to be involved. An example of this would be, all members of the team have to have at least one touch of the ball in order for a point to be scored.
Type of movement skills included for a wheelchair user. There is forward wheelchair propulsion, wheelchair stopping technique, backward wheelchair propulsion, stationary wheelchair pivot, moving wheelchair pivot, which are all different movement skills. These can be used in the curriculum as it's broken down into integral parts in order to complete each skill. For example, the forward wheelchair propulsion consists of 6 integral parts in order to complete the skill.
Hands are positioned on top of the dead centre of the rims. Pads of hands and thumbs are resting on tyres, fingers slightly curled under the hand rims. Next, elbows and shoulders and hands are in alignment, ready for elbows to be extended forward. Trunk is slightly flexed with shoulder over tyres. The drive hands and elbows forward and down using trunk flexion to reach forward. And finally, push hands through the drive phase for at least 1/4 of the wheel's circumference.
By allowing for the use of the wheelchair to have different stages of learning, it can relate to another skill without using a wheelchair. For example, a bowling cricket can be also broken down into different steps as presented by the BBC. There's the run-up, the bound, the coil, release and the follow-through. By using these steps from both the wheelchair user and the cricket ball perspective, it enables both to follow simple steps in order to achieve a set task.
One recommendation from us would be a whole school approach. We feel this will be needed in order to ensure children can take part in physical education lessons, whether this be in a classroom, a sports hall or a field. From this we mean that if change rooms are not accessible, i.e. doors are not wide enough for a wheelchair, or a lift is not in place if they are on the second floor, then this is ultimately excluded them from lessons straight away. This has to come from a whole school approach to ensure that the school has doors leading to the changing rooms or sports hall which are wide enough for a wheelchair. And if the changing facilities become inaccessible, then this means that there needs to be a disabled toilet in place for the child to be able to successfully get changed. Another recommendation, as we can see from earlier, is the level of training teachers and teaching assistants get in order to be knowledgeable about disabled students and how they can be confident in adapting games. Also, planning for the lessons plays a huge part, and it's important for us that staff at a school learn how to effectively plan. The significance of this for the delivery of high quality physical education is that we want every single learner in the school to have full access to the curriculum and never ever to feel excluded. This then brings about enjoyment for all, and a positive and progressive learning in physical education should occur.
Our belief is that with the right strategies, thoughts and processes, we can include everyone. It can be achieved that mainstream education is fully inclusive. This picture is a photo taken at the London 2012 Paralympic Games, which is one of the most successful yet. The photo shows two athletes who are clearly highly dependent on their wheelchair, and they've been given the opportunities at school or club level to play boccia, and have been successful enough to watch an Olympic Games where they can show off their incredible skills of boccia to millions watching it. This for us shows just why anything is possible. With the right adaptations, equipment, thought processes, planning and everything else in getting our wheelchair users more involved in physical education.